Hello there and welcome to our first episode of doing something feasty in the kitchen. Now today we're going to be making focaccia bread, which we posted all over our social media. I'll pop a link here now for you to view it. If you want to follow along at home, then make sure you've got this recipe to hand and all this wonderful ingredients, because today I'm going to walk you through cooking your very own focaccia. It's perfect to partner up with a lot of charcuterie boards, a lot of lovely Italian sauce dishes, and just overall it is delicious. Awesome, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sift through 500 grams of strong white bread flour. Now you can find this in all good supermarkets. I've got 500 grams here which I've already weighed out, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it through this sieve to make sure we get out any big lumps or clumps, and then we're going to add our yeast and our salt to either side of the bowl, because we don't want the salt going on top of the yeast, because otherwise that's going to kill it before we've even started. So let's sift through this now. Excellent, so we've now sifted through the flour into our bowl. Just going to give this a little bit of a wobble so we get a nice flat surface. Then what you're going to do is you're going to get your yeast and you're going to get some salt. Now you don't have to use flaky salt. I would recommend not using table salt, however, because that's not what we're trying to go for here. So if you've got a salt grinder at home, then fantastic. If not, pop down to the Feasty Larder, see if we're stocking anything that you could use there, or just pop to your local shops because they've got stuff like this lying around everywhere. Now on one side of the bowl we're going to take our yeast. We're going to take our little teaspoon. We're going to get a teaspoon of this out now. And then we're just going to place that on one side of the bowl. Now, on the other side, make sure that you're paying attention to this part, because on the other side of the flour now, away from where you just put the yeast, we're going to put in some salt. If you're using a salt cracker, then just 4 cracks. If you've got some fancy salt that you're able to scoop, then I'd recommend using 2 teaspoons of salt. To go with the yeast that you've just put in. You should have put in about 7 grams or 1 full teaspoon. So here we go. Awesome. So now that we've done that, they're both on either side of the bowl. So I put my salt in here, I've got my yeast in here. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to start to mix the flour and the salt in on one side. And now I'm going to incorporate the yeast into the whole mixture, just the dry mixture. I'm just going in there with my fingers, just gently mixing everything around, not doing anything too strenuous to it, not trying to encourage or disturb anything too much. Here we go. So now that we've mixed this all together, I've just made a little well here in the middle. Now what this well is going to do is it's going to give us the ability to add our wet ingredients into it now. And what we're going to put in there is some oil. There needs to be olive oil. Don't use vegetable oil before you think about that at home. We're going to use olive oil, and we're also going to put some lukewarm water in here gradually, incorporate the mixture together, and we should end up with a lovely sticky dough. Okay, so you see me making that well, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to get my olive oil. I'm going to get my 2 tablespoons in as well. Excellent, so that's all our olive oil in there now. And then what we're going to do is, what I've got here already prepared is about 350 millilitres of lukewarm water. Now don't throw this all in at once, because you could end up with your mixture being too wet and too hard to work with. So what we're going to do, we're just going to go with a little bit of a splash in at a time. So we've got a little bit in here now. You should start mixing that around, and then in the middle again, add some more of that water. Try and bring stuff down from the sides over the top of that water, squeezing it together, trying to get more and more of that flour combined with your wet ingredients now. Because what this warm water is going to do, it's going to wake up that dried yeast that we've added in there. It's going to start getting everything to work together. So I'm just adding a little bit more water in at the sides, try and get the last of all of this. Because as I say, we should end up with a lovely sticky dough to work with on our table here. You might be able to hear a little bit of squelching through my microphone. That's completely normal. Excellent. So now we've got everything incorporated into this. What we're going to do now is, it turns out I actually didn't need all my water. I think I've got about 100 millilitres or so left in there. It really does depend from person to person. I'm going to take this, I'm going to swipe it around, I'm going to try and incorporate everything that might be left in that bowl. I'm going to take some flour now. Some of that same strong white bread flour. It's important to use the same flour because you don't want to interrupt your dough. And what you're going to do is you're just going to put some on the table here, and you're going to begin your kneading. Now, as I said earlier, this dough will be very sticky, as you can see from what's inside my bowl now. There we go, we're just going to sift this. There we go. And we're literally just going to pick this up, put it straight on our table, and just start kneading it. Okay, and our kneading process, all in all, is going to take about 10 minutes. 10 minutes of kneading altogether, and you should end up with a lovely dough. Cool, so I'm going to set a timer now for about 10 minutes. I'm going to knead this dough for about that long, not too firmly, not too fiercely. In order to knead your dough, you're literally just pulling, folding over, pressing down. Pulling, folding over, pressing down. You're trying to get it with that back bit of your palm, and you might notice my hands are covered in dough right now. By the end of this kneading process, everything will be off and I'll have lovely, squeaky clean hands. So come back in about 10 minutes. We'll fast forward now, we'll do a little clock spiral around, and you'll see that it's 10 minutes later. Excellent, so our 10 minutes of kneading is up now. I've managed to shape this into a lovely ball. What we're gonna do with this now, this is your focaccia dough. You can see how it's got a lot drier and a lot more spongy, elasticy almost. What you're gonna do is you're gonna place it in a bowl, put a tea towel over the top of it nice and loosely, and then you're gonna put it somewhere to prove. Now, if you've got a proving drawer at home, fantastic. Leave it in that proving drawer for an hour. If you don't have a proving drawer, it's best to try and leave it somewhere nice and warm and dry. I'm going to be leaving it in my airing cupboard. There's no clothes drying in there, which means it's not going to be humid, but it's going to be a nice warm environment for this dough to prove in. Why is it important to put it somewhere warm? Well, because the yeast prefers warmer temperatures, okay? That's what's going to help activate it, and that's what's going to get that yeast doing the work, okay? So we're going to place this in a bowl now, and we'll come back in about an hour. Excellent, so your dough's been proving for an hour now, and as you can see, it has changed in size quite considerably. So the next steps of what we're going to do now is you're going to grab a shallow tin that you can bake this in, a rectangular tin. I've got this one here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some oil. I'm just going to drizzle this across the pan, just a small drizzle. There we go. And then I'm going to use the back of my hands, so the top of my knuckles here. I'm just going to use that to move the oil around the tray, make sure that we've got every single part covered, including the edges. Make sure you get right up into those edges and those corners. And now that I've actually got my oily hands, I can take them and slide them down the back of the dough and just ease this out of the bowl. And what's going to happen is our dough will leave and we'll get this lovely piece of focaccia dough that we can now shape ready for baking. Of course, if you've got a little spatula at home, you can use that too. But as you can see, look at how much bigger this dough is. Isn't that fantastic? Look at that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull this into a rectangle roughly, like so. And now what we're going to do is we're going to help to use gravity so we don't damage our dough too much in order to stretch it out. So we're just going to let it sort of dangle from the hands like so, and we should get this lovely sort of stretched dough, because what you want is you want your dough to be about the size of the tin that you're trying to get it into. Okay, you'll see them stretching pizzas like this. You want it to roughly be the size of your tin. So I think I've got that now actually, so if I bring that tin over, yeah, perfect. So what I'm going to do now is very carefully support the dough from underneath. I'm going to get this, drop it in the tin, nice and oiled, squeeze those sides down a little bit. And then what we're going to do now, take our tea towel back, and this is going to be covered back over, and we're going to leave it to prove in our proving space for another 45 minutes. That's just so the dough can expand a bit more, take up all of the room inside that tin, get comfortable for it. It's going to be baking once its second prove is done. As you can see, we've come back from our second prove now. Our dough has filled out our dish a lot more. All that's left to do now is just put the finishing touches on this before it goes into the oven and starts its bake. Now make sure you're preheating your oven to 200 degrees Celsius, ready for the bake of this dough. The first thing that we're going to do to start prepping it is, it's going to sound a bit bizarre, but again with your fingers, you're very hands-on with this recipe. We're just going to poke a few holes in this focaccia. Give it its characteristic look. There we go. Let's do some more here. There we go. So now it's got those characteristic holes of focaccia. The next thing that we're going to do, more olive oil. This is why it's probably best to have a bottle of this next to you whilst you're doing this recipe. And you're just going to drizzle it over the top, just everywhere. Nice big drizzle. And again, use the back of your hand just to make sure that's all over your dough. Make sure you're in nice all the corners. Then you're going to get your salt. You're going to be very generous with the salt all over the top. Make sure you're covering your dough. And now that you've put some salt on the top, as well as drizzled some olive oil, you're going to get your rosemary and you're just going to sprinkle that on the top as well. So I've got some already pre-chopped rosemary. If you've got fresh rosemary growing in your garden, make sure you take it off of the twigs. You just want to be left with those lovely leaves. That's where all the flavour and all the seasoning is. You're just going to do a generous sprinkling of that all over the top. I reckon that'll be enough for me. And so you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this before you start your bake. So our focaccia has been baking away now for 20 minutes, and look at that beautiful golden crust on the top. You can see all the rosemary sort of embedding itself into the dough. Got those lovely cracks of salt on the top. And if we listen very carefully, yeah, we've got a lovely strong crust as well. No soggy bottoms here as well, but it's lovely and fresh and hot. Let's take a knife and slice this straight down the middle. Here we go. And look at that. You can see the steam coming off as well. And you can see all these wonderful little pockets of air inside, thanks to the dimples that we made, and they're here present on the top as well. And it's this lovely, airy, spongy focaccia that you can see here so clearly. Excellent. So let's go in now and let's give this a try while it's nice and fresh and hot. Here we go. Oh wow. Thank you for joining me in this first video of cooking with Feasty at home. If you've enjoyed this, make sure you give this video a like, share it with your friends, and make sure you go and follow us on all our social media channels so you don't miss recipes like this in the future, and you can give all this a go yourself at home. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next time. Make sure you feed your Feasty.